Donald Trump has just chosen his future Secretary of the Treasury, his future Minister of Economy. It will be Scott Bessent. But who exactly is Scott Bessent, and what are his main economic ideas? Donald Trump has already chosen his new Treasury Secretary, his Minister of Economy. It will be Scott Bessent. Bessent is an important figure in the United States financial industry. He has worked since the beginning with some of the most significant investors in the history of this sector. For example, with Jim Rogers, Stanley Druckenmiller, and also with George Soros. He was Soros' chief investment officer from 2011 to 2015. Additionally, he has received the endorsement, before Donald Trump, two of the largest financial firms in the U.S. economy, J.P. Morgan and BlackRock. It is, therefore, an appointment with which Donald Trump intends to convey confidence to the financial markets. He has indeed chosen one of his own as Minister of Economy. This suggests that the policies Scott Bessent will implement will be more or less aligned with the interests of the financial industry, with the interests of the financial markets, or the main players within the financial market. So much so that, for example, Elon Musk was wary of the appointment of Scott Bessent as Secretary of the Treasury, believing he came from financial elites whose regulatory privileges also needed to be trimmed. To a certain extent, the appointment of Scott Bessent as Secretary of the Treasury could be reminiscent of Steven Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury during Donald Trump's first term, who also came from the financial industry, Wall Street. However, it seems there will be an important difference here. According to Donald Trump's circle, Mnuchin was too globalist. Was he a Wall Street man? Yes, but he was not a man of MAGA, of the Make America Great Again movement. And that complicated the implementation of some parts of Donald Trump's economic agenda. Meaning, of those worst parts of Donald Trump's economic agenda, such as, for example, the imposition of tariffs. In the case of Scott Bessent, however, he is expected to be fully aligned with Donald Trump's tariff policy. In fact, one of the main mandates that Bessent will receive is to impose huge tariffs on the rest of the world. And it seems that he currently has no problem with that assignment. But beyond coming from the financial industry and being willing to implement Donald Trump's protectionist agenda, what are the main economic ideas that Scott Bessent has in mind? Well, in a recent interview, he explained that his macroeconomic plan for the United States involves what he called the 3-3-3 rule.
So that would be my 3-3-3.
And what is the 3-3-3 rule? Well, firstly, Scott Bessent wants to achieve raising the potential growth of the United States to 3% annually.
3% real economic growth. And how do you get that? Through the deregulation, more U.S. energy production, slaying inflation, and forward guidance on confidence, so people can make investments, and the private sector can recover from this government spending loss.
And the main lever they want to push to increase the growth of the United States to 3% annually is the regulatory lever. Scott Bessent is expected to work closely with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to thoroughly deregulate the United States economy and thereby boosting the potential growth of that economy. Secondly, Scott Bessent believes that for the gross domestic product of the United States to grow by 3% annually, it is not necessary to have a massive public deficit. Hence, he believes that the goal of achieving 3% annual growth is compatible with reducing the United States public deficit by the year 2028. Not in the very short term, but by the end of the legislative term. be compatible with reducing the public deficit of the United States to 3% of the GDP?
Two, I would urge him to make public his desire to get the deficit down to 3% by the end of his term. He didn't get us to these 6 or 7% deficits. I think that they averaged 4 under him. So get that down to 3.
Currently, it stands at around 6% of the GDP. And Scott Bessent, as I mentioned, over the next 4 years, wants to gradually reduce it to 3% of the GDP. He doesn't want to achieve a surplus. He wants to reduce the deficit, and he wants to reduce it while still lowering taxes, which is another of Donald Trump's economic pillars. Therefore, if you lower taxes and want to reduce the deficit, it will be necessary no matter what to cut public spending. And that is another area where Scott Bessent will have to work closely with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in the Department of Government Efficiency. Identify all those areas of public spending that can be eliminated. And thirdly, Scott Bessent aims to extract 3 million additional barrels of oil daily on American soil.
And then 3 million more oil barrels equivalent a day from U.S. energy production.
Currently, the United States is extracting approximately 13.5 million barrels each day. And Scott Bessent wants to increase this figure to 16.5 to 17 million barrels per day. Today, the United States is already the world's leading oil producer. But if Scott Bessent achieves his goal of increasing production by 3 million additional barrels per day, the United States would achieve energy self-sufficiency. It would be independent from an energy standpoint. And that's what underlies this 3-3-3 rule. 3 million additional barrels of oil per day to achieve energy independence. Summing up, increase the potential growth of the American economy to 3% annually, alongside a reduction of the public deficit to 3% of the GDP, and also alongside an increase in annual oil production, with which independence has been achieved, with the resulting reduction in energy costs from 3 million barrels of crude oil per day. It must be said, however, that so far we do not know much more about Scott Bessent's economic ideas, given that, being a professional in the investment world, he had dedicated himself to working in that field and not to publicly presenting his ideas or doctrines on public policies that might be desirable to apply. However, we do know one more thing, and that is Scott Bessent, at least rhetorically, has a strong aversion to Peronism. In a recent conference, in fact, Scott Bessent compared Joe Biden's economic policy to the economic policy of Peronism.
What has ruined Argentina? Peronism. Bidenism is the beginning of Peronism. It is the state taking over the means of production. It is putting on so much debt that it could never be rolled back. We can still grow our way. If we get to this problem now, we can still grow our way out of the problem. We can roll back the government and the economy, but I will tell you, 4 more years of Joe Biden, and it's the point of no return. It will mean big tax increases. It will mean government debt so big that we could have a debt crisis.
In many ways, it's true that Joe Biden's economic policy resembles the economic policy of Peronism. But the same can be said, in fact, about the economic policy implemented by Donald Trump in his first term. A significant increase in tariffs to protect inefficient national industry, like Peronism, a significant increase in public debt in Donald Trump's case, due to tax cuts without reducing spending, but an increase in public debt nonetheless, just like Peronism, and pressures on the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates at ultra-low levels, like Peronism. Let's hope that this animosity, even if rhetorical, from Scott Bessent against Peronism will prevent Donald Trump's second administration from continuing to emulate many of the typically Peronist economic policies. If they want to distance themselves from Peronism, and also from Joe Biden's economic policy, they must decisively commit to free trade, reducing taxes, and cutting public spending. And for a sound currency that is not manipulated through inflation to artificially lower interest rates. And for the moment, unfortunately, they don't seem willing to take that path. I hope that in the future, Javier Milei has time to explain with rigor and detail what Peronism really was, so that they might be frightened by many of the things they intend to do and change course.